Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1, An Unexpected Discovery. Hercule Poirot had chosen a quiet morning for his journey to Bath, a simple pleasure in a world that had grown untidy with other people's dramas. He stepped onto the platform at Paddington with his valise polished like a mirror and his hat at the precise angle he favoured. The station, with its iron ribs and glass roof, breathed out steam and the faint smell of oil. Announcements quivered along the vaulted air. Porters hurried with the focused energy of men who knew that a minute could break a timetable. Poirot found a seat in the waiting room and placed his valise beside him. He permitted himself the comfort of a good view, a clock that told the truth, a coal fire coaxed into cheerfulness, a row of chairs facing the door like a small tribunal. He admired order wherever he could find it. "Beg pardon, sir," said a porter, appearing with the respectful cough of a man who disliked to disturb but felt he must. He was young and earnest, the buttons on his jacket newly shined. "You don't happen to be missing a bag?" "Non, mon ami," Poirot replied, calm and warm. "Everything that belongs to me is at my side." "But you have something that belongs to someone else, perhaps?" The porter nodded towards a handsome leather bag on the far chair. "Found it just now. Been sitting 10 minutes at least. The gentleman who left it, if it was a gentleman, he went in a bit of a rush. I looked up and the door was swinging and there it was." Poirot rose. He disliked fuss, but he was never indifferent to a puzzle. The bag had the rich brown of well-treated leather and bore, pressed modestly into a corner, the initials RS. The handle showed the faint whitening of a crack that had been carefully fed with polish. The buckles were brushed clean, yet there was a smear along the left clasp, an oval, as though a finger had touched and withdrawn. "May I?" said Poirot. "Inspector's on his way," the porter said, uncertain. "But yes, sir. Better someone like you have a look than me blunder." Poirot removed a large square handkerchief from his breast pocket. He took the bag by its metal fixtures rather than the leather. There is a way to touch an object that respects what it may yet tell you. The lock had not been forced. The key was in place, turned half back, as though a cautious owner had meant to return at once. Said Poirot. "He locks, but he leaves the key. It is a paradox. Or a message." He unfastened the clasps with that delicate economy which was his habit in all things. Inside, everything lay neat. A folded white shirt with the soft sheen that good cotton acquires after careful laundering, a notebook with a black cover, a razor in its case, a small packet of collar studs, a pencil, well sharpened, slipped along the notebook's spine as though it were a bookmark. No wallet, no pocketbook, no card case. No laundry list, but a discreet tape-stitched mark on the inside collar of the shirt, RS17, and beneath it, in blue thread, Harbridge Laundry, Bath. "Ah," murmured Poirot. "You send your shirts home. That speaks of habit, perhaps of roots. The number is not the first of the day. He is an established customer." "Means he's from Bath then?" the porter asked, grateful to be guided. "It means he has business with Bath," said Poirot. "These are not always the same." He lifted the notebook. It was ordinary, the sort one could buy at any stationer. The first few pages were blank. Poirot's fingertip, through the handkerchief, felt the faint ghost of pressure marks on a later page, writing from a sheet since removed. He turned gently to the center, then to the back cover, where many people will tuck unthinking things they wish to keep and yet not see. There it was. A slip of paper, folded in 4. He saw at once that it had been folded with care and then, curiously, refolded with less care. The edges did not meet. He unfolded it. My death is of my own choosing. Madur. The words were written in a small, deliberate hand. The ink had dried clear, no smear, no blot. A slow writer, Poirot thought, or someone simulating slowness. The paper smelt faintly of tobacco that had been extinguished rather than finished. He held the slip nearer the window, to give the light its say. The pressure of the nib pressed deepest upon the downstrokes of choosing and lighter upon Madur, as though the hand had grown cautious at the signature. The door opened again and a constable came in, bringing with him a modest draught and an air of official discomfort. "What have we here then?" he asked. His eyes jumped to the paper in Poirot's hand. Oh, I see." Poirot returned the constable's look politely. "Do you see, indeed? That is excellent. Few men see at once." The constable reddened but stood his ground. "It's plain enough, isn't it, sir? A suicide note. We'll need to find the man before he does himself a mischief." "Yes," Poirot said, very gently. "We must do that." The constable, whose name, Harrow, was stamped on his collar, bent over the bag. "Initials RS. Will circulate." "You say you saw the gentleman who left it?" he asked the porter. The porter shifted. "I saw someone, constable. Might have been a gentleman. Tallish. Or medium. Had a hat on. A dark one. He carried the bag left-handed." He looked at Poirot, anxious. "It was the left, wasn't it?" Poirot glanced at the handle. There, on the left side of the handle, the leather had taken a darker polish from the natural oils of a frequent hand. On the right, it was lighter. "Yes," he said. "Left-handed. A very small thing, but a small thing repeated leaves a trace." Poirot peered again into the bag. Beneath the shirt, in the lining pocket, he found a ticket stub, pressed flat. It bore the imprimatur of Great Western Railway and a destination stamped in purple, Bath, Spa. The date was that very day. He held it out to the constable. "Your gentleman bought a ticket for Bath," he said. "And yet his bag sits here still." Constable Harrow scratched his chin. "Could have changed his mind." "Or had his mind changed," Poirot said, mild again. He lifted the shirt by its edges. One cuff bore the faintest shadow along the hem, a pale crescent as if brushed by wax. There was no stain to the eye, it was more the disobedience of the fabric, a patch that refused to match the rest in texture. Poirot did not speak of it. A clue must be allowed to ripen, like fruit on a branch. "Sir," the porter put in, "I don't like the sound of that note. We get all sorts, but not that. And the word at the bottom, Madur, is that a name? Foreign, is it?" "It could be a surname," the constable said, trying his hand at knowledge. "Or a place." Poirot folded the paper closed and set it flat upon the table, smoothing it with the handkerchief. "It is something that wishes us to read it as a name," he said. "It may even be a name. But names have a way of being useful in two directions, the one you look at, and the one that is meant to be looked at. We shall remember that." Harrow frowned. "If it's a suicide, Mr. Poirot," said Poirot. "Mr. Poirot," Harrow continued, "then it's a matter for the coroner when we find him, God forbid. If it's not, it's a matter for the inspector. Either way, I'll have to take the bag and the paper." "My certainement," Poirot said, offering them with a small bow. "But allow me 1 minute." He turned to the notebook again. He did not open it. Instead he looked at the edges of the pages, which were clean, unruffled. A man who uses a notebook leaves it slightly fanned, as a book gains its memory of hands. This one had the stiffness of a purchase unbroken by habit. Yet the pencil carried a beveled edge that only comes from repeated sharpening with a blade rather than a little machine. 2 habits in conflict, a new notebook, an old pencil sharpened in an old way. The combination, Poirot filed silently, was odd. Outside, a train sighed into motion. The light shifted on the waiting room floor and caught the shine on Poirot's shoes. He liked that. It was satisfying when the world reflected one's care back at one. He replaced the shirt, set the pencil exactly where he had found it, and closed the bag. "Will you describe the man again, if you please?" Poirot asked the porter. "You said tallish. You said a dark hat. Was his coat wet?" The porter blinked. "Wet, sir. The air smells of last night's rain," Poirot said. "A man who walked would show it on his cuffs. A man who took a cab would show it on the hem. Did you notice either?" The porter's brow cleared. "No, sir. He was tidy. Dry as a Sunday floor." "A cab, then," Poirot said, more to himself than to the others. "Or he waited under shelter and entered quickly." "Thank you, my friend. You have been most useful." The constable wrapped the bag in a canvas cover with the practical care of a man who knew he would be blamed if damage occurred. He tucked the note into his breast pocket after sliding it into an envelope. "I'll put this before Inspector Graves straight away," he said, with a glance at Poirot that was not quite a request and not quite a challenge. Poirot gave him a courteous nod. "Do so. And tell him that the wording is too tidy to be true." "Too tidy?" Poirot adjusted his tie, which had not needed adjusting. A man who intends to end his life does not hide his farewell in a folded note at the bottom of a bag he leaves behind. He speaks to someone, somehow, even if only to the void. He writes to be found. This is not written to be found. It is placed to be discovered. He smiled, almost kindly. "There is a difference." Constable Harrow paused at the door. "And the name?" Poirot let the word settle in the air between them. "Madur." It sat there, undecided, a person, a place, a mask. "It is a pebble dropped into a pool," he said at last. "Watch how many circles it makes." When they were gone, Poirot sat again, his valise by his side, the fire murmuring companionably. He no longer saw the station in its pleasant order but as a stage upon which a play had begun with a neat prop and an off-stage voice. He drew from his pocket a small notebook of his own, used, fanned at the edges, bearing the marks of habit, and wrote, not suicide, but performance. Then, on the next line, R.S., Bath, Harbridge Laundry. On the third, left-handed, ticket to Bath, key left in lock. And after a thoughtful moment, Madur watched the circles. His train would leave soon. He had intended a restful weekend. Instead, he found he disliked the idea of departing London while an unknown RS slid towards death, or had been pushed towards it and made to look as if he had jumped. Poirot stood, light as a dancer, and picked up his valise. If the bag's owner had business with Bath, then Bath would have business with Hercule Poirot. Chapter 2, The Elusive Owner. The Great Western bore Poirot to Bath with the gentle insistence of a clock that knows its duty. Through the window the countryside unrolled in damp February colours, hedges stood as dark stitches on wet fields, and church spires pricked the low sky. Poirot, who preferred order even in views, found comfort in the regularity of telegraph poles and mileposts. In his notebook he drew 3 neat columns, facts, habits, theatrics, and entered beneath them a handful of words, R.S., Bath ticket, key left in lock, left-handed, new notebook, old pencil, Madur. On arrival he did not hurry. Haste had a way of knocking useful detail into the gutter. He presented himself first at the police station, where Inspector Graves received him with a politeness edged by professional caution. Graves was a square-shouldered man whose face suggested both diligence and an unspoken impatience with irregular methods. Yet he had heard enough of Poirot to recognize that irregular did not mean unsound. "We've a message from Paddington," Graves said, tapping a telegram. "Abandoned bag. Suicide note. Initials RS. You believe, Mr. Poirot, that it is not quite what it seems." "I believe," Poirot replied, removing his gloves finger by finger, "that it is what someone would like it to seem." "That is different." "The difference, it may hang a man." Graves inclined his head. "Right. The laundry mark you found, Harbridge. They're 5 minutes away near the river. If RS is a customer, they'll have a name and an address." "Excellent," said Poirot. "Let us begin with the routine and end with the remarkable." Harbridge Laundry was a long brick building with a sort of humming cleanliness about it. Steam sighed behind frosted windows. Inside, women at presses moved with practiced, economical grace. The manager, a pale gentleman with a ledger and a pencil tucked like a twin behind his ear, greeted them with the firm hospitality of a man who keeps a good book and is proud of it. "RS-17, Poirot said. "A customer who receives his shirts with that mark." The manager traced columns with a forefinger that had grown paper smooth. "Here we are. Salewood, Richard. Abbey Gate Chambers, North Parade. Standing account. Shirts Tuesday, collars Thursday. Reliable pair. Particular about buttons." Left-handed, he smiled at Graves's look, ink stains always on the left forefinger when he signs the docket. "Clerks notice these things." "It is good for the world," Poirot observed, "that clerks notice these things." "Last delivery?" Graves asked. 2 days ago. Collected by his secretary, Miss Bennet. He was off to Bristol, she said. Would sign on his return. Poirot wrote Salewood, Abbey Gate and underlined it once. "Merci," he said. "And one more small curiosity, do you ever use beeswax in your work?" "Beeswax?" "For thread waxing, sometimes. Not common, but for particularly fragile stitching, yes." "And who did Mr. Selwood's shirts last?" "Mrs. Pratt, Station 3. He called across the room. A woman with calm hands and a no-nonsense bun looked up and smiled without pausing her iron. "Mrs. Pratt, that Salewood gentleman, anything unusual?" "Fussy about the cuffs," she said, cheerful. "Wanted a soft edge, not razor-sharp. Said the crease rubbed his wrist when he wrote." "Which wrist?" Poirot asked. "Left, I think. He watched his cuff when he signed." "Gentle sort." "Thank you kindly." Poirot had what he needed, a name, an address, a small portrait of habit. They walked through Bath, whose pale stone always looked to him like a city washed, and set out to dry. At Abbey Gate Chambers the caretaker produced a key with ceremony. "Mr. Selwood's not in. Off on business, so Miss Bennet said. We don't hold with late returns." He accepted Graves's card and stood aside. The office of Richard Salewood was as tidy as the bag had been. The kind of order that spoke not of sterility but of an efficient mind, shelves arranged by subject, files labelled in a clear hand, a desk that, at a glance, told you where the blotter belonged, where the letter knife lay, where the inkwell took its rest. The chair was drawn in, not left at an angle for an imminent return. And on the desk, an oddity in daylight, a brass candlestick holding a candle burnt down and pinched at the top, a small crater of wax fallen onto the blotter. Poirot did not go to it first. He stood at the door and allowed the room to explain itself. At the window, no film of moisture, so it had not been standing open. On the carpet, no damp marks of recent boots. On the mantel, a clock that had stopped at 20 minutes past 9. A stopped clock, unless the mainspring had died of old age, was never random. He went to it, wound it 2 turns, and it sprang into life. It was stopped by intent, he murmured. A hand that stilled it at the hour chosen. Graves raised an eyebrow. Why stop your clock? So that another will accept the hour it points to, Poirot said. Let us see who wishes us to accept. He approached the desk. The wax spill on the blotter formed a tear-shaped pool that had run toward the right-hand edge, which told him the desk had a slight tilt that way. A tiny grain of soot was embedded in the wax, caught when the candle guttered in a draught. Yet the room, as they felt it now, was still. He touched the window latch, cold, a faint smear of polish on the brass, and beneath it, on the sill, a ghost circle where a small jar had once rested and was lately removed. He bent. On the floor by the skirting board lay a match, burnt only at the tip. He held it to his nose. Sweet, faint, beeswax, not tallow. Graves ran a finger along the blotter's margin. It's an office, Mr. Poirot. Lawyers use candles when the lexi flickers. To read. Poirot asked. Then they place the candle where the light falls evenly, they do not hover it over a drawer and drip upon the blotter. Regard. He pointed to a shallow scratch near the right-hand drawer lock, almost invisible unless you knew to look. Something thin was used to encourage a lock. Not with skill. And afterward, someone who disliked using the electric light preferred the little flame, perhaps because they wished not to be seen from the corridor. You will ask the caretaker whether the hallway lights show beneath this door when lit. Graves scribbled a note. You see the world, Mr. Poirot, as if every object has been talking while we were out. They are terrible gossips, Poirot said, smiling. He opened the right-hand drawer. Inside lay a tidy row of envelopes, a packet of blue carbons, a tin of paper clips, and, curious, a small leather tray meant for cufflinks, empty but for one. The single cufflink was gold with a modest onyx center. Its partner, evidently, was elsewhere. Poirot lifted it, weighed it in his palm, then replaced it exactly. Ought to keep only one, Graves said. Not odd, said Poirot. Inconvenient. People accept inconvenience only when it means something to them. This one meant something, and the other more. He shut the drawer. The lock turned smoothly. Someone opened you, he told it, and shut you again with care. There was a delicate cough at the doorway. A woman in her 30s stood there with a hat that had seen better mornings and a controlled look about the mouth that spoke of a habit of discretion. Miss Bennet, Graves said, we were hoping. Inspector, she nodded. Mr. Selwood's secretary. I came to fetch the correspondence. Mr. Selwood is, she checked herself, seeing the unfamiliar figure of Poirot. Forgive me. I fear I am in the way. Au contraire, said Poirot. You are precisely the person who is not in the way. You knew Mr. Selwood's habits. I knew his schedule, she said, with a secretary's modesty that hid pride. He left on Wednesday for Bristol. A routine visit. I arranged his papers and he took his bag. He said he would be back Friday morning. She looked at the desolate little candle and her composure flickered. That was not here when I locked up, she added quietly. We do not use candles. The lights, the evening he left, were they working? Graves asked. Perfectly. You fetched shirts from Harbridge 2 days ago. Poirot said, as if it were a trifle. Yes. They know me. Her eye caught the blotter. Oh, someone has made a mess, she said, and the genuine affront of a tidy soul rang clear. That is not Mr. Selwood's way. Poirot liked her for that sentence. Tell us of his way, he said. She glanced around the room as if taking the measure of a friend. He wrote with his left, very neat, a curious slope downward when he hurried. He disliked visitors after 6 unless arranged beforehand. He respected the clock. He never left the desk in disorder. There you see the nibs. He kept 3 in rotation and wiped them each evening. If he used a candle, he would have set it on a saucer, not directly on paper. Did he have enemies? Graves asked. Mr. Salewood? Miss Bennet considered this as if it were indecent. He had disagreements. Lawyers do. But enemies, she hesitated. Mrs. Drake was demanding. Mrs. Drake. A client. Recently widowed. Investments abroad. She called twice on Tuesday and once on Wednesday morning. I wrote the messages on the pad. Miss Bennet went to the telephone table and lifted the top sheet. Poirot watched the simple action with keen attention. The top page bore 3 notations in pencil. Mrs. D, urgent, 10.15, Mrs. D, please ring, and the last, smudged, ED, will come 5.30. The sheet beneath bore the ghosts of the same words. And did she come? Poirot asked. I left at 5, said Miss Bennet. Mr. Salewood had not returned from the afternoon court. He said he would call Mrs. Drake from home if it grew late. Poirot's finger hovered above the phone pad. In the corner, faint and half erased, he saw the beginning of another word, ma, and the downward tail of a D or a P. Not conclusive. Not nothing. He filed it with the rest. You say he took his bag, Graves said. Describe it. Brown leather, initials RS in the corner. He kept a notebook with it. A new one, he said, because the old had too many crossed-out pages for his liking. She gave a small smile. He was quite vain about how clean his notes looked. Poirot did not return the smile. The image of the new notebook at Paddington and the old Way's pencil slid neatly into place beside Miss Bennet's remark. A man who liked his notes clean would not tear out a confession and tuck it at the back of a bag. He would compose it with ceremony or not at all. Miss Bennet, he said, did Mr. Salewood ever mention the word a Madur to you? She frowned, genuinely at sea. No. Is it a client? It is a pebble, Poirot said softly, and we shall watch the circles later. Graves took Miss Bennet's statement with the steadiness of a man who understood the weight of unsensational facts. When she had gone, the room felt emptier in a way beyond the physical. Poirot stood at the window again and looked at the street, where Bath went on being reasonable and golden and unsuspecting. Your thoughts? Graves asked. That someone stood at this desk after Miss Bennet left. That they turned out the electric light and used a candle. That they opened a drawer to take something, a paper or a trinket, and they were afraid of being seen from the corridor. That the clock was stopped to produce a time. That Mr. Salewood expected to return and did not. You make it sound settled, Graves said. It is not settled. Poirot's eyes rested on the solitary cufflink. It is composed. There is a mind arranging objects to tell a story. We must decide whether the story is honest. Graves nodded. We'll start with Mrs. Drake. And Bristol hotels. And anyone who saw him after 5 on Wednesday. And, Poirot added, drawing on his gloves, with cabmen near Paddington who noticed left-handed travellers who tip with a coin presented at an angle. He gave the room a last precise glance, as if committing its geometry to memory. Order is a language, he said. Mr. Salewood spoke it fluently. So does his absence. Let us see which of his acquaintances is less fluent and makes the mistake that good order reveals. They stepped out into the pale afternoon. Bath's crescents curved with perfect manners around their secrets. Poirot, who had a healthy respect for secrets, carried the office in his mind like a well-packed case, the candle that should not have been, the clock that had been silenced, the empty half of a pear, the faint beginnings of a word on a telephone pad. The little grey cells, as he liked to call them, had begun to hum. Chapter 3: The Significance of Madur. Poirot breakfasted at a small hotel off Great Pulteney Street where the tables were set with a neatness he found almost musical, knives equidistant, cups aligned to the saucer's handles, napkins folded into obedient triangles. He buttered his toast with delicate precision and considered, between sips of coffee, the 5 letters that had attached themselves like burrs to his mind. M-D-U-R. He wrote them on his pocket card and tried them in several shapes. A surname? A place? An invention to lead the feet astray? He turned the card over, as if truth might prefer the reverse. Then he put it away. Words, like cats, come best when one pretends one does not want them. Inspector Graves collected him at 9 precisely, an exactitude that earned a faint approving movement of Poirot's eyebrows. Back to Abbey Gate first, Graves said as they walked. I've a constable posted at Mr. Selwood's door. If we're to understand this Madur, we'll want samples of Selwood's hand and recent correspondence. If he wrote that note, we'll know it. Très bien, Poirot agreed. And we shall ask another small question, whether Mr. Selwood loved the smoke. Smoke? Graves glanced at him. Poirot's mouth tilted. The slip in the bag carried the sigh of extinguished tobacco. Not the cigar that finishes itself with a flourish, but the hurried pinch between fingers. Men who write in their own offices leave their own odours upon their papers. The constable at the door stood to attention. Inside, the office had not shifted its composed expression since the day before. Poirot's gaze moved, patient and exact. He opened the left-hand drawer this time, finding a pad of receipt blanks, a bottle of sand for drying ink, old-fashioned, but there are men who find comfort in old contrivances, and a little drawer at the back where letters ready for post waited with stamps affixed. From these, 3 bore Selwood's signature across the flap in a neat, left slanting hand. Poirot smiled at the tiny grace note, the tale of Selwood's D tucked in upon itself, a habit of a tidy mind. He compared, in his head only, that letter shape to the one in the note. The D there had been upright, austere, the curve mean and ungenerous. Not the same. Not at first glance. But he would not speak that conclusion yet. Facts must be allowed to stand without leaning. Graves meanwhile examined the out tray. Routine, deed sent on, a lease renewal, a note to a bank manager. He paused at a thin file secured with green tape. Drake, Eleanor, Investments. He looked up. That name again. Poirot made a small temple of his fingertips. Let us not be impatient, even a kettle must be permitted to simmer before it sings. They canvassed the room for the secondary question. There was no ashtray. No telltale smudge of ash near the window. The faintest citrus note in the air belonged to furniture polish, not smoke. On the mantel, a narrow porcelain vase held 3 yellow roses crisping gently at the edges. Beneath the vase, Poirot found a square of card, the sort florists use, with no inscription. He replaced it, satisfied that the office was a place where scent arrived in decent daylight, not as a blue thread of evening indulgence. Miss Bennet says he disliked disorder, Graves said. Dislikes ash, most likely. Then the note was not written here, Poirot said. That is all. Not who, not where, only not here. Graves sealed the outgoing envelopes in a bag for the police photographer and took a selection of recent letters bearing Selwood's hand. Poirot paused a moment longer at the desk. He tested the chair with a gentle touch and felt, in the faintest way, a difference of height at the right foreleg. A packing card slipped under to cure a wobble. A man who cures wobbles did not leave his world untidy. That truth settled into Poirot's mind like a stone in clear water. The Bath Reference Library on Queen Square received them next, cool and obliging. A high-domed silence rested there, broken only by page turns and the occasional cluck from a conscientious librarian. Graves stated their inquiry in practical terms. The librarian, who had the look of a woman who had catalogued her own childhood, brought forth 3 volumes without asking why, a gazetteer of India, a commercial directory of colonial firms, and a map index. Poirot took the gazetteer first. Madurai, yes, too many vowels, he murmured, tracing a line with a fingertip. Madura, the old spelling of Madurai. Madur, ah. He found a small entry, a district township in Bengal with an industry in reed mats. Mats, he said softly. Madur, the reed and the mat made from it. A word that is also a thing. Graves peered. Mats? Floor coverings, low and useful, said Poirot. I read somewhere that they are woven by habit more than by art. He lifted the commercial directory. Let us see the names who have the habit. In a list of firms trading in jute, tea, and sundries, he found a Madur Weaves and Trading Company, Calcutta. A modest listing, founded 8 years prior, agents in London noted as Turton and Bray, Limehouse. Graves wrote it down. Mrs. Drake had investments in India. Miss Bennet said as much. Then the circle is not large, Poirot replied. But we must be careful. A word printed in a book is a respectable thing. Murderers sometimes borrow respectability. He asked, very politely, for last year's Times of India extracts and the Bath Chronicle archive. The librarian frowned at the labour and then delivered both with quiet triumph. Poirot skimmed ruthlessly, not for drama but for patterns. He found mention of a small strike at a textile warehouse in Calcutta, settled without violence, the report dull enough to be authentic. No names leapt out. He ran a finger down a column of exchange notices and found Madur Weaves and Trading again, a new partner admitted 6 months ago, initialed E.D. Poirot closed the book at once. E.D., Graves repeated. Eleanor Drake. Perhaps, Poirot said mildly. There are other EDS in the world. Edward D., Edwin. Let us not race when a walk will do. They thanked the librarian and left, stepping back into Bath's pale light. Poirot's mind reassembled the pieces, a solicitor tidy to the edge of fussy, a secretary who respected his order, a candle used in a room that did not want candles, a stopped clock choosing a time, a note that smelled faintly of extinguished tobacco and carried a foreign-sounding word printed in directories. The surface story was eager to be accepted, which always made Poirot suspicious. Telegraph office. Graves suggested. If Salewood had business with India, there may be cables. Just so, Poirot nodded. At the office, a clerk with ink on 2 fingers referred them to the manager, who, after reading Graves's card and a brief explanation, consulted a ledger whose columns had the pleasing firmness of good arithmetic. We handle messages for several solicitors, he said. Mr. Salewood included. Let me see, here. 2 outgoing cables to Turton and Bray this month, 1 incoming from them last week. Routine inquiries. Nothing yesterday or today. Graves asked for the text. The manager demurred, Graves produced a magistrate's order, the ledger yielded. The incoming cable, dated the previous Thursday, read, Madur Weaves accounts dispatched. Clarifications on Drake estate requests follow under separate mail. TB. The outgoing reply from Salewood, received. Requesting particulars dividend irregularities, confirm London agent attends Tuesday. RS. And the second outgoing, advise whether ED authority extends to transfers under Clause 9. RS. Graves whistled silently through his teeth. There it is again. Yes, Poirot said, and did not smile. Again. Seems clear enough, Graves went on. Salewood was chasing irregularities in a firm called Madur Weaves, E.D., whether Mrs. Drake or some other, has authority in question, the bag turns up with a note saying my death is of my own choosing. Madur. It points one way. Which is precisely why I distrust it, Poirot replied. A murderer who wishes to escape builds a signpost that points far into the distance. He hopes the police will set off with sandwiches and stout hearts and never quite return. They walked in companionable silence for a short way. Bath's facades looked innocent of commerce or crime. Poirot paused outside a tobacconist's, Abraham's and Son, carved cleanly into the wood. He turned in impulsively. The shop smelt of agreeable leaf and beeswax polish, which made his little theory prickle agreeably. "Can I help you, sir?" said Mr. Abrahams, a neat man with clever eyes. "I desire only information," Poirot said. "A paper, thin, good quality, could it take, upon it, a whisper of scent from a cigarette that has been pinched out?" "It could," Mr. Abrahams said, amused by the oddity and entirely willing to instruct. "And if it were a Turkish, you'd have a touch of sweetness about it for a minute or two. If a pipe, latakia, say, you get a leather note that lingers longer." "What did you have in mind?" "Not latakia," Poirot said. "Something extinguished in haste. Perhaps a small cigarette of a fashionable sort." Abrahams nodded. "Then a Turkish blend is your likely culprit. Women favor them, gentlemen who wish to be modern, too." He lifted a small silver case from beneath the counter, polished from years of exciting display. "Abdullah's, Murad's, Eastern Leaf, that style." Graves, who preferred a pipe and frowned on modernity in general, thanked Mr. Abrahams, and they stepped out again. "You think a woman wrote the note?" he asked as they walked. "I think," Poirot said, "that the paper inhaled a small fashion. Whether from the writer or from the room where it was written, we do not yet know. And one more thing, beeswax. Laundry uses it, yes, but so do households to polish wood and to dress thread for mending. In Mr. Selwood's office I smelled beeswax upon a matchstick. In this street I smelled beeswax in 3 shops and 3 houses, and not one of them was the laundry." Graves grunted assent. "And the clock?" "A small theatre," Poirot said. "It tells us an hour someone prefers. We shall find, I think, a witness whose memory of time matches that clock, and we shall be invited to applaud." They lunched quickly, not because Poirot liked haste but because he disliked wasting good appetite on indifferent food. Afterwards they returned, briefly, to Abbey Gate. Miss Bennet had left neatly typed lists of Selwood's appointments. Tuesday evening, Mrs. Eleanor Drake, 5.30, at Chambers, did not occur. Wednesday noon, court filing. Wednesday afternoon, bank, 3.00. Wednesday late, home. Poirot examined Selwood's blotter beneath the top layer, holding a page obliquely to the light to coax out indentations left by prior notes. He found a line written firmly and then struck through, "Call E.D. Re, authority," another, "Madur, ask T&B about license." He allowed Graves to see only the second line. "So he wrote the word himself," Graves said, satisfied. "Yes," Poirot agreed gravely. "He wrote it to remind himself to ask a question. But the note in the bag answers a different question altogether." "What question is that?" "It answers this: where shall we send the police?" Graves looked at him. "And your answer?" Poirot's eyes went to the cool window, where Bath's proper world strolled unalarmed. "I answer that we shall stay precisely here," he said. "For when a signpost urges you towards Calcutta with such eagerness, the road you truly want is likely to be the very street beneath your shoes." Chapter 4: The Widow's Visit. Bath, on a damp February afternoon, seemed to hold its breath beneath a low lid of cloud. The city's honey-coloured stone gleamed darker with the day's rain, and carriages clattered along North Parade with brisk indifference to the mystery that now occupied Hercule Poirot's every thought. He had returned from the telegraph office with Inspector Graves, and they had just settled into the inspector's office when the constable announced a visitor. "A Mrs. Eleanor Drake, sir," the young man said, a trace of curiosity betraying itself in his tone. "Insists it is urgent." Poirot's eyes flicked up, and a small smile formed. "Ah, the lady herself comes to us." When the mountain walks to the prophet, Inspector, we must be ready to listen carefully. The motives, they are like birds, they flutter when the net draws near. Mrs. Eleanor Drake entered with an air of quiet command. She was elegantly dressed in black silk trimmed with jet beading, her figure slim, her face pale but striking, framed by a hat of such severe design that it drew attention rather than deflected it. She carried herself with the unmistakable bearing of a woman accustomed to being obeyed in drawing rooms, and perhaps indulged in other corners of life as well. Inspector Graves, she began, in a voice low but resonant, the sort of voice that seemed trained for persuasion. And, you must be Mr. Poirot. I have heard of you. Her eyes lingered on him longer than politeness required, as though measuring his stature against reputation. You flatter me, madam, Poirot said, inclining his head. Pray, sit. We are at your service. She sank into the offered chair, removed her gloves finger by finger, and folded them with a neatness that told Poirot much. I must speak plainly. I fear something dreadful has happened to Mr. Salewood. Graves leaned forward. What makes you say that, Mrs. Drake? Her lips pressed together. Because he would never disappear without word. Mr. Salewood was my solicitor. He had been managing my late husband's estate, particularly the investments in India. We had an appointment Tuesday evening. He failed to attend. Since then, nothing. I called his office, I wrote, I even walked there in person. His secretary could tell me nothing. And now I hear, as she hesitated, her eyes flicking to Poirot. I hear there was some incident with his bag. Graves nodded cautiously. It was found abandoned in London. With a note. The widow's hands tightened on the folded gloves. A note? What kind of note? Poirot, watching her face, answered, a message suggesting that Mr. Salewood had chosen to end his life. He let the words hang, as though to watch how they landed. Her reaction was immediate but complex, first astonishment, then a flare of anger, quickly smoothed into incredulity. That is impossible. Richard Salewood was a man of balance, of moderation. He was not the sort to take his own life. And if he had wished to, she caught herself, lowered her gaze, and said more softly, he would not have left his affairs in such disarray. He was scrupulous. Poirot tapped his fingertips together lightly. Yet, madam, there is the little note. It says, my death is of my own choosing. Madur. At that word, Madur, the faintest flicker passed over her expression. A tightening at the mouth, the smallest narrowing of the eyes. Poirot, who had spent a lifetime cataloguing such betrayals of the human mask, did not miss it. You know the word, he asked gently. No, she said too quickly, then amended, at least, not in any personal sense. I am aware of certain firms in India, Madur weaves, is it? My husband had dealings through Salewood, but those were years ago. I myself have no involvement beyond what is proper for a widow tending her affairs. Graves interjected. Mrs. Drake, forgive me, but did your husband not pass only last year? Yes. A sudden fever while in Calcutta. Her voice had cooled, grown formal. Mr. Salewood handled the estate. The investments were intricate. He assured me all was above board. And was it? Poirot asked softly. Her eyes flicked to him again, a flash of irritation behind the civility. You suggest otherwise. I suggest only, Poirot said, that Mr. Salewood himself was investigating matters. He sent cables concerning irregularities. He questioned authority, yours, madam, under certain clauses. Colour rose faintly in her cheeks. He was thorough. Perhaps overly so. I trusted him to act in my interests, but lawyers sometimes enjoy tangling matters to justify their fees. Poirot's moustache quivered with amusement. Ah, but the tidy Mr. Salewood, he was not a man to make knots where none existed. No, madam. He straightened threads. She gave a light laugh that did not touch her eyes. Mr. Poirot, you are determined to think ill of me. Not ill, madam, Poirot said, leaning forward with sudden gravity. I think only that you know more of Madur than you pretend. A silence stretched. Graves shifted, the sound of his pen scratching notes into a pad. Mrs. Drake met Poirot's gaze levelly, though her fingers tightened around the gloves until the knuckles whitened. I know enough, she said at last. Enough to wish I had never heard the word. Poirot inclined his head, accepting the half-confession for now. He let the silence breathe before changing tack. Tell us, if you please, of Tuesday evening. You had an appointment with Mr. Salewood. Yes. 5:30. He did not come. You were at home. At my house on Camden Crescent. I waited until 7, then dined alone. No visitor, no message. None. And yet, Poirot said gently, your name appears 3 times in the messages Miss Bennet recorded. You called twice on Tuesday, once Wednesday morning. I was anxious, she admitted. It was unlike him to be careless. Poirot gave a small bow. Merci, madam. You have been most frank. Graves asked a few more practical questions, times, acquaintances, documents, but the widow gave nothing beyond polite, rehearsed answers. At last she rose, smoothed her skirt, and set her gloves neatly upon her hands again. If you learn anything further, she said, looking directly at Poirot, you will let me know, won't you? For my peace of mind. Mise OUI, Poirot said with grave courtesy. For your peace of mind. When the door closed behind her, Graves exhaled. What do you make of her? Poirot sat very still, fingers steepled. I make, my friend, that she is a lady most careful with her gloves, and most careless with her eyes. They betrayed her when she heard the word Madur. She knows it intimately. Enough for motive. Motives are not so obliging, Poirot murmured. They rarely carry their names stitched upon them. But we shall see. Tell me, Inspector, did you note how she laughed when I pressed her? Not the laugh of amusement, but of a duellist parrying a thrust. She is not unskilled. She will fence with us. But sooner or later, he tapped his temple lightly. The little grey cells, they will find the opening. He rose, adjusted his tie, and looked at the rain-streaked window. It is curious, n'est-ce pas? Mr. Salewood had tidy drawers, tidy books, a tidy mind. And in the middle of this order, chaos. A candle, a clock stopped, a cuff-link lost. Disorder is the enemy of such a man. Who brings it? That is the question. Perhaps it is Mrs. Drake, perhaps another. But she, I think, knows where the first thread leads. Graves shut his notebook. Then we follow it. Poirot smiled faintly. We follow it, yes. But gently, Inspector. For threads, if pulled too sharply, they break. And I do not wish this mystery to end before it has revealed its true pattern. Chapter 5, Red Herrings. The following day dawned pale, a faint mist softening the outlines of Bath's crescents. Poirot, punctual as the clock in his pocket, met Inspector Graves at Abbey Gate. They walked together through the streets as shopkeepers swept their steps and milkmen rattled bottles into doorways. Poirot enjoyed such scenes, the choreography of a city waking with order. Yet beneath this calm he felt the pulse of something disordered, an untidy hand arranging Mr. Selwood's fate. Graves carried the morning newspaper folded beneath his arm. We've had 3 reports overnight, he told Poirot. None of them agree. A clerk in Bristol swears Salewood lodged at the Grand Hotel on Wednesday. The hotel itself denies it. Another witness claims he saw Salewood boarding a train to London that same evening. And, to add spice, Hargreaves, the rival solicitor, has been telling anyone who'll listen that Salewood was on the edge of bankruptcy. Poirot raised his brows. 3 paths, all leading nowhere. Excellent. It is the very confusion we must expect. If the truth were so eager to present itself, Inspector, we could retire already. They called first at the Grand Hotel in Bristol, a short train journey away. Poirot spent the ride in contemplative silence, his fingertips pressed together, occasionally scribbling a word in his pocket notebook. Bristol? London? Ruin? The hotel manager, a brisk woman with steel spectacles, greeted them in a lobby scented with coal smoke and polish. No, gentlemen, she said firmly, Mr. Salewood did not stay here. His name appears in none of our registers. I keep them myself. We are precise. But your clerk insists he saw him, Graves pressed. The woman pursed her lips. Mr. Holden has a tendency to dramatize. He saw a man with a similar build, perhaps. It was a busy evening. But I vouch for our books. They do not lie. Poirot asked to see the register. Each line was written in a steady hand, checked against payments. Indeed, no Art Salewood appeared. But Poirot noted a curious entry, Mr. Smith, London, written in a different hand than the others, slightly slanted, hurried. The room number was later crossed out and re-entered. Your Mr. Smith's came late? Poirot asked. Yes. Paid in cash. Gave no details. Left before breakfast. Why? Poirot only smiled. I am always suspicious of the Smiths of this world. They travel too often in disguise. Back in Bath, they sought out the witness who claimed Salewood had taken a train to London. He was a cabman, red-faced, with a talent for certainty. Took him to the station myself, Wednesday night, the man declared stoutly. Tallish, neat in his dress, brown bag. Left-handed, gave me the fare like this. He demonstrated with a flourish. Poirot watched with polite interest. Did you notice, mon ami, the initials upon the bag? The cabman hesitated. Couldn't swear to it. And the hat? Dark. Bowler, I think. Poirot nodded. So you saw a man of average height, with a brown bag and a hat, travelling by train. A common sight, n'est-ce pas? The cabman bristled. I know what I saw. Yes, yes. You saw enough, but perhaps not who you think, Poirot said gently. A man can carry another man's bag, you see. A man can even imitate another's manner of paying if he wishes to be remembered. They left the cabman disgruntled, but Graves was thoughtful. If someone wished to make it appear Salewood travelled to London, that's how they do it, stage a sighting, plant the bag, forge the note. Poirot nodded approval. Très bien, Inspector. You grow suspicious. That is good. Suspicion is the salt of investigation. Their final call that day was upon Mr. Hargreaves, Salewood's rival solicitor. He occupied an office less orderly than Salewood's, papers in small drifts, an ink blot or two on the desk, a clock ticking too fast. He greeted them with a smile that revealed more teeth than warmth. Sad business about poor Salewood, he said, shaking his head. But truth will out, he was drowning in debt. His practice failing. Mark me, suicide is no surprise. Is that so? Poirot asked mildly. And yet his secretary says otherwise. His accounts, she insists, were neat. His fees paid. What evidence have you for this drowning, monsieur? Hargreaves spread his hands. Rumours, Mr. Poirot. Reliable rumours. Clients whispered. I had two approach me already to transfer their cases. Poirot's moustache twitched. Ah, rumours. They are like the feathers from a pillow, once released, impossible to gather again. But they are not facts. Hargreaves reddened. Believe as you like. Salewood was finished. Poirot rose, offering a courteous bow. Perhaps. But if so, he finished very tidily. And I find suicides rarely pause to tidy first. Outside, Graves muttered, he's hoping to profit. Mise OUI. A rival who inherits clients when the man is gone. It is not evidence of murder, but it is appetite. An appetite, Inspector, can sometimes tempt a man to eat what he should not. As evening fell, Poirot returned alone to his hotel. He dined modestly, then retired early with his notebook. He considered the 3 red herrings of the day. The hotel clerk, certain, but the books denied him. The cabman, certain, but vague in detail. Hargreaves, certain in malice, but without substance. Poirot drew a neat box around them and wrote beneath, all too eager. He turned then to the constant details, the candle, the cuff-link, the stopped clock, the note with its faint scent of Turkish tobacco, the word Madur. These, he believed, were the true bones of the puzzle. The rest were distractions scattered like breadcrumbs to lead the police away. Yet he could not dismiss them entirely. Each fossard suggested a guiding hand, someone orchestrating confusion with care. And that hand, who held it? A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. The porter handed him a sealed envelope, delivered by an unknown boy. Poirot thanked him, waited until he was alone, and opened it. Inside was a single slip of paper. In neat block letters it read, "Stop digging into Madur." Poirot lifted it to his nose. There it was again, that faint sweetness, a ghost of extinguished Turkish tobacco. He smiled grimly. Ah. So the spider stirs in its web. Bon. Then Hercule Poirot shall stir also. He slipped the note into his case, extinguished the lamp, and lay down to sleep. But his little grey cells continued their quiet dance, tracing the lines of false trails and wondering which circle of truth the word Madur would finally reveal. Chapter 6: A Body at the River. The River Avon runs through Bath with the patient confidence of a thing that remembers older cities. On a grey morning 2 days after the abandoned bag, a bargeman bringing his craft down by Pulteney Weir saw a shape snagged among the older roots and called to the constable on the bridge. By mid-morning Inspector Graves sent for Poirot. The bank was slick with winter damp, men in flat caps clustered at a respectful distance. The police surgeon, Dr. Merton, straightened as Poirot approached, and raised a hand to caution the onlookers. A canvas sheet lay on the grass, beside it, a pair of scuffed shoes and a hat that had not survived the water. Recovered an hour ago, Graves said quietly, drawing Poirot aside. Weighted down. Stones in the coat pockets. We've not turned the pockets out yet, pending your eye. Très bien, Poirot murmured. Let us look with care, not with haste. They lifted the sheet. The river had done its indifferent work, the face was battered by its journey among stones and roots, making recognition uncertain. But the clothes were of a sober, professional cut that fitted what they knew of Richard Salewood: dark suit, clean shirt, plain tie. The collar retained the faint orderliness of a man who disliked letting himself go. The identification will have to be by clothing and effects, Dr. Merton said. We'll take him to the mortuary. For now, the essentials: he has water in the lungs. Drowning, almost certainly. But there's more. He touched a place behind the left ear with a gloved finger. A contusion. Pre-mortem, I think. Not necessarily fatal, but enough to dizzy a man before he goes under. Weighted? Poirot asked. 2 large stones, Bath stone fragments, from a path or garden, I'd say, Graves replied. Not river pebbles. See the edges? Square cut, not rounded. We found lengths of cord in the pockets, tied to hold the stones fast. Poirot inspected one of the stones in its damp wrapping. It was the yellow of Bath's own buildings, pitted and crumbly at the edges. Not taken from the river in a panic, he said softly. Selected elsewhere, with time to choose. You do not find Bath stone on a shingle bank. Graves nodded grimly. There's also this. He handed Poirot a leather wallet, empty of money, cards, and photographs, and a pocket watch, old-fashioned and decent. Poirot turned the watch over. The back bore a discreet engraving, RS. The glass was intact. Inside, the hands had stopped at 5 minutes past 11. 11:05, Poirot said. Curious, is it not, when the clock in Mr. Selwood's office was stopped at 20 minutes past 9? A murder that loves the theatre will sometimes forget that two performances cannot share one curtain time. Graves looked at him. You think the office clock was staged? I think, said Poirot, that the watch obeyed the river and the clock obeyed a hand. They turned to the clothing. Dr. Merton, precise and neat in his own way, eased back the sleeve to reveal the shirt cuff. Poirot bent very close. There a pale crescent along the hem, just a degree different in sheen from the surrounding cloth. A tiny grain of soot clung at the edge. Beeswax, Poirot said. And a guttering catch of smoke. As in the office. The shirt in the bag had a whisper of such a mark, this one carries its twin. He was close to a candle whose flame struggled in a draught. The pockets, Graves prompted. Dr. Merton lifted a soggy handkerchief, a set of keys on a simple ring, and a few soft lumps of river clay. In the inner breast pocket his tweezers drew out a small oiled paper envelope, tied with a string. The doctor looked from the package to Graves and back to Poirot. Open it, Graves said. The oiled paper had kept its contents dry. Inside lay a slip of paper, folded twice. Graves unfolded it and read aloud, his voice flat, I could not escape. Madur. He turned it so Poirot could see. The words were in pencil, neat block letters, not a running hand. Poirot held the paper to his nose. The faint sweetness was there again, elusive as a memory, Turkish tobacco, extinguished in haste. He did not comment. Instead, he compared, in his mind, this message with the first, there ink, here pencil, there a small, deliberate cursive that affected slowness, here a tidy, impersonal print, there the phrase my own choosing, here I could not escape. Two suicides, written by two different temperaments. Or one author, anxious to provide variety? Someone is generous with their notes, Graves said grimly. Too generous. Generosity is a vice in the murderer, Poirot replied. He gives us more than the truth requires. He knelt, not caring for his trousers, and examined the cord used to weight the pockets. It was sash cord, the sort used for blinds and curtains. A little beeswax residue clung to the fibers, darkened by the water. The knots were neat, square, no fisherman's flourish, no amateur's panic. A tidy domestic knot, Poirot thought, the kind a careful hand makes without thinking. Doctor, he said, may I trouble you for his cuffs? Merton eased back both sleeves. On the left cuff there was the faint polished wear that comes from a man who writes much and minds the edge against his wrist, the very irritation that had sent Selwood to ask for a soft crease from the laundry. The right cuff was clean. Poirot looked for the cufflinks. The buttonholes were empty. Missing, Graves said. None found on him. Poirot's mind saw again the single onyx cufflink in Selwood's drawer. One remains in the drawer, he said softly. The other, where is it? Removed before the river, I think. Cufflinks do not leap free into the water in pairs. They moved a little aside while the body was lifted. Poirot stood very still, the little grey cells humming. The bathstone blocks in the pockets, the beeswax on a match in the office and on a shirt cuff, the stopped clock, the stopped watch, the note that smelt faintly of the East, folded in oiled paper that a housemaid might keep for her rags or a careful woman for her hairpins. A domestic scene, he thought, dressed in foreign syllables. Graves broke into his reverie. Press will say suicide. Weighted pockets, a note, 2 notes now, sightings in London. It writes itself. Ah, but it is the worst sort of writing, Poirot said, with sudden asperity. It is writing that goes too much to the point. A true suicide leaves the world messy. He is not considerate of narrative. Here, Inspector, we have a considerate narrative. It bows, it explains, it thanks us for coming. I mistrust such manners in death. They walk back to the road. A light rain began, softening the city. Graves lit a cigarette, then, remembering Poirot's fastidiousness, moved a step away. You think Salewood was struck, bound to a fate he did not choose, and pushed in. I think he was struck, Poirot said. Then, whether conscious or not, made to drown. The stones are not desperation, they are method. And method, in this case, belongs to a person who owns bathstone in quantity, who has beeswax to hand, who ties neat knots without thinking, who could write on paper kept dry in oiled wrapping, and who understands that the word Madur will ring like a bell in certain ears. Mrs. Drake, Graves said at once. She is one possibility, Poirot allowed. But we must be exact. We do not hang a woman because the materials of her housekeeping resemble the materials of a murder. Many homes in Bath polish with beeswax, many blinds are tied with cord, many gardens have bathstone fragments. It is the pattern that matters, not the single thread. They paused on the bridge. Water combed itself over the curve of the weir. Poirot looked down and, for a moment, felt the full weight of the little sentence I could not escape. It was designed to be moving. That made him mistrust it all the more. At the mortuary, Dr. Merton promised a full report by evening. Look for 2 timings, Poirot requested. The blow behind the ear and the drowning. And if you can, Doctor, there may be traces beneath the nails. River silt, yes, but perhaps something else. Powder from bathstone, beeswax, polish, anything that did not belong to the river. When they left, Graves said, we'll need to notify Miss Bennet for identification, poor woman. And we must speak again with Mrs. Drake. Also Hargreaves, if only to see how fast he runs to tell his clients. And the cabman, Poirot added. Ask him again, very sweetly, whether his man wore a watch upon a chain or upon the wrist, whether he smelt of Turkish cigarettes, and whether he tipped with a coin presented at an angle, left-handed. It is the same story, Inspector, told in too many voices. Somewhere, one voice will falter on the line. They split their tasks. Poirot, before returning to the station, diverted to Camden Crescent. The houses there stood clean and grand, the steps scrubbed, the brass polished. At Mrs. Drake's door he did not ring, he merely looked. The front path had been patched with small bathstone squares after some repair, a pile of spare fragments lay discreetly behind the side gate, crusted with the same pale dust he had seen on the stones by the river. The blind cords visible in the drawing-room window hung straight and neat. A beeswax scent drifted faintly from the letterbox, furniture freshly dressed. A maid, catching sight of him from within, moved to shut the inner door. Poirot lifted his hat and walked on, content for the moment with the arithmetic of smell and sight. Back at the station, Miss Bennet sat very straight in a wooden chair, her face composed and white. Graves had told her what awaited. She looked up as Poirot entered. If it is him, she said, and her voice was steady only by effort, I will know by the stitching inside his jacket. He had it altered. The tailor seam runs a little off at the left seam, you can feel the ridge. Mr. Salewood noticed everything, but he forgave that because the tailor had turned her hem beautifully. Poirot bowed his head. "You have the eye of a good secretary, mademoiselle. It is a gift and a burden." When she had gone with a constable, Graves closed the door and spoke in a low voice. "Where does this leave us?" "With a murder dressed in tidy clothing," Poirot said. He opened his notebook and wrote, very small, a list. Bathstone, domestic sauce. Beeswax, a match, cuff, cord. Knots, square, neat. Notes, 2 hands, 2 tones, same perfume. Watch, 11:05, office clock, 9:20. Cufflinks, 1 left in drawer. Left-handed, owner, murderer may be either. He shut the book. Next, we gather the people whose lives touch these facts. Mrs. Drake. Mr. Hargreaves. Miss Bennet, though I do not think she is our spider. Perhaps also the tobacconist, who can tell us who buys the Turkish cigarettes with the eager modernity. And, Inspector, one more thing. Yes? The oiled paper. Ask your men to find out, quietly, which household in Camden Crescent purchases oilskin packets from Abrahams and Son. Mr. Abrahams keeps a memory as tidy as his counter. He will recall if a lady bought such a thing to keep her hairpins or a gentleman to keep his tobacco dry. Graves gave a tight smile. You do not think small, Mr. Poirot. I think exactly, Poirot said, and for once his voice held no lightness. A man who could not escape is owed that much precision. We will not let a considerate narrative be the last word. Chapter 7: The Gathering of Suspects. The parlour at Camden Crescent was a picture of restraint. The heavy curtains admitted only a muted light, and the fire in the grate smouldered politely, casting a modest glow on polished surfaces that smelt faintly of beeswax. Poirot, seated in the largest chair, crossed his immaculate shoes at the ankle and let his little grey cells settle. Inspector Graves, at his side, tapped a pencil against his notebook. Upon the chairs arranged about the room sat the principal figures of the case. Mrs. Eleanor Drake, dressed in sober black with a string of pearls at her throat. Mr. Hargreaves, the rival solicitor, his expression caught between smugness and irritation. Miss Bennet, pale but composed, clutching her handbag like a shield. Inspector Graves, notebook ready, expression firm. The housemaid hovered in the doorway, eyes wide at this unlikely assembly, until Poirot dismissed her gently. We will call if we require tea, mademoiselle. She fled gratefully. Poirot allowed the silence to stretch, studying the faces before him. Mrs. Drake's eyes were steady, though her fingers tapped once, twice, against the arm of her chair. Hargreaves shifted impatiently. Miss Bennet sat like a statue, lips pressed together. My friends, Poirot began at last, his voice calm, we are here because of one man, Monsieur Richard Salewood. A lawyer, precise and orderly, who disappeared last week. His bag was found at Paddington, his body later in the Avon, his pockets weighted with Bath stone. And upon him, 2 notes, each signed with a curious word, Madur. He paused, letting the syllables hang in the air. Mrs. Drake's gaze flickered, just for a moment, to the fire. You all knew Salewood, Poirot continued. Each of you, in your way, had reason to be entangled with his life. Therefore, before I tell you what I know, I must hear what you have to say. He turned to Hargreaves first. Monsieur, you have spoken freely in Bath of Selwood's ruin. Will you repeat that here, before his secretary and client? Hargreaves cleared his throat. Salewood was finished. His practice dwindled. Clients whispered of irregularities. Some came to me. I speak only what I heard. Poirot inclined his head. Rumors, yes. But facts? None. A man of debts does not keep shirts laundered weekly, nor a secretary upon regular pay, nor clients in foreign trade. He may be careful, he may be proud, but not ruined. Your words, monsieur, are smoke, thick, but without flame. Hargreaves coloured, muttered something about professional rivalry, and subsided. Poirot's gaze shifted to Miss Bennet. Mademoiselle, you were loyal to your employer. You knew his habits. Tell us, could he, have ended his own life? She sat straighter. No, Mr. Poirot. He disliked disorder too much. He said once that suicide was a thief's exit, leaving others to sweep the dust. He would not. He was too responsible. Her voice trembled, but she steadied it. And he never smoked. Not once in the years I worked for him. The notes, those are not his. Poirot nodded gravely. You see, Inspector? From his secretary, who observed him daily. A testimony to weigh against the staged letters. Now Poirot turned to Mrs. Drake. Madam, you are last, though not least. You dealt with Salewood in business, and you sought him urgently. Your late husband's investments were in India, were they not? And you pressed Salewood for transfers, dividends, authority. Her chin lifted. I pressed for what was mine by right. My husband left me dependent on accounts in India. Salewood delayed, questioned, interfered. Perhaps he meant well. But I could not be kept waiting for what was due. Could not be kept waiting, Poirot repeated softly. Yes. And when Salewood asked questions about irregularities, when he cabled London and Calcutta for clarity, you grew impatient. So impatient that you came here, perhaps, to search his office by candlelight. The wax, madam, it is very telling. And the bathstone in your own garden, it matches too well the blocks found in his pockets. Her face whitened, but she met his eyes squarely. Are you accusing me, Mr. Poirot? Not yet, Poirot said gently. But I ask you this, did you know the word Madur before it appeared upon those notes? Her hands tightened on her lap. It is the name of a firm in India. My husband invested there. Beyond that, nothing. Ah, but you flinched when first I spoke it, Poirot said, his tone mild, almost regretful. You flinch because you know more. Perhaps that knowledge is innocent, perhaps not. But your eyes betrayed you, madam. Graves broke in impatiently. Poirot, we cannot hang a woman for blinking at a word. Non, Inspector, Poirot agreed. We hang no one on a blink. We wait for the pattern. But see already, we have one who spreads rumors without facts, one who swears by the victim's steadiness, and one who knew him in business and pressed him hard. Already the outline of the truth forms itself. He rose, walking to the window, adjusting the blind cord with delicate fingers. Knots, Inspector. The stones in the river were bound with neat square knots. A sailor? Non. A domestic hand. A hand that ties curtains each morning, blinds each evening. The same cord, the same neatness. He released the cord and turned back. These are not the gestures of a drowning man, but of one who wishes us to think him drowned by his own choice. Hargreaves shifted uncomfortably. Then who? Poirot raised a hand. Patience. The final pattern is not yet. But one small matter troubles me greatly. In Selwood's office we found a single cufflink, gold with onyx. Its twin was missing. On his body, no cufflinks at all. Why, Messrs, Mesdames, does a man remove one cufflink and leave the other? Unless, of course, it is taken by another hand, for concealment. He let the question linger, moving his gaze slowly across their faces. Miss Bennet's eyes widened with confusion. Hargreaves frowned, baffled. But Mrs. Drake's lips pressed tight, as though sealing some thought inside. Poirot resumed his seat. I will not accuse tonight. That is for tomorrow, when the evidence sits tidily in a row, as I like my cutlery. But know this, Salewood was murdered. The notes were forged. The body in the river was placed, not surrendered. And in this room sit those whose lives intersected with his. One of you, perhaps more, knows the truth of Madur. And Hercule Poirot will see it arranged clearly before us all. A silence followed, heavy and taut. The fire snapped. Outside, the mist thickened. Poirot smoothed his moustache with delicate fingers. Tomorrow, Miss Amiss, we shall tie the last knot. And unlike those in Selwood's pockets, it shall not sink beneath the river but hold fast in the light. He rose, signalling the gathering was at an end. One by one they filed out, Hargreaves grumbling under his breath, Miss Bennet silent and pale, Mrs. Drake regal but stiff, her composure clinging like her pearls. Inspector Graves lingered a moment, eyebrows drawn. You're playing a dangerous game, Poirot, he muttered. Poirot gave his little smile. My's OUI, Inspector. But murder is always a dangerous game. Better it be played by me than by those who think themselves clever. Chapter 8, Poirot Explains. The following evening, under skies heavy with unspent rain, Hercule Poirot assembled his company once more in Mrs. Drake's drawing-room at Camden Crescent. The curtains were drawn tight against the gloom, the lamps glowed faintly golden, and the air carried that unmistakable sweetness of beeswax polish. Poirot had requested the meeting, and each guest arrived in varying states of composure. Mrs. Eleanor Drake, upright and immaculately dressed, her pearls steady at her throat. Mr. Hargreaves, sharp with curiosity, though less confident than before. Miss Bennet, pale but determined, clearly grieving yet resolved to hear the truth. Inspector Graves, notebook in hand, eyes narrowed, ready for the reveal he half expected, half dreaded. Poirot stood before the fire, hands folded neatly behind his back, his moustaches immaculate. He let the silence ripen until the tension pressed against the very walls. Then, with that characteristic softness of voice, he began. My friends, we are gathered to draw aside the veil. You know now the principal facts. Richard Salewood, solicitor, vanished. His bag appeared at Paddington with a note, my death is of my own choosing. Madur. Days later, his body was recovered from the river, weighted with Bath stone. Another note lay in his pocket, I could not escape. Madur. To the hasty eye, a simple tragedy of self-destruction. But I, Hercule Poirot, do not accept tragedies so obligingly written. He held up a finger. Because, you see, suicide seldom tidies its desk. Suicide seldom chooses Bath stone blocks for its performance. Suicide seldom writes two different notes in two different hands, with two different moods. And suicide, Miss Amiss, does not stop a clock at 1 hour, and a watch at another. Graves muttered, we knew as much. Murder, staged as suicide. But by whom? Poirot inclined his head gravely. Patience, Inspector. The little grey cells, they must arrange the pattern in order. He paced a few steps, slow and precise. Consider the notes. The first, written in ink, in a cursive hand that sought to appear deliberate. It bore the faint perfume of extinguished Turkish tobacco. The second, in block letters, neat, precise, also faintly perfumed with that same tobacco. Yet Salewood himself did not smoke. Two notes, two hands, same perfume. What does it tell us? That the same person, yes, placed both. They use cigarettes fashionable among modern ladies, or gentlemen who wish to seem exotic. In Bath, such cigarettes are not common. But at Abraham's and Son, the tobacconist, they were sold to one household, Camden Crescent. to this very house." Poirot turned sharply. "To you, Madame Drake." A hush fell. Mrs. Drake's lips tightened, but she said nothing. Poirot lifted a second finger. "The stones." "Bathstone, cut square fragments, tied neatly with sash cord. Not river pebbles." "Where do we find bathstone fragments in abundance?" "In the gardens here, behind your gate, madam." "And the cord, beeswaxed, tied in neat square knots as domestic knots, the same you tie each day with your blinds." "In Selwood's office, I smelled beeswax on a match, on his cuff, I saw the trace of waxen soot, as though a candle guttered when you searched his drawer in secret. Always, the beeswax, the signature of a house so well polished as yours." He spread his hands. "Again, all roads lead to Camden Crescent." Poirot raised a third finger. "The cuff links. Selwood kept them in a tray in his drawer. When we searched, only one remained. The other was missing. Upon his body, no cufflinks at all. Why remove one and leave the other?" "Because, madam, you feared that if he were found, that onyx cufflink engraved with your late husband's initials would betray the connection between Selwood and your affairs. So you pocketed it, leaving one behind by mistake. And mistake, Miss Amos, is the undoing of the cleverest criminal." He turned towards Miss Bennet. "Mademoiselle, you told us Selwood disliked disorder, that he called suicide a thief's exit. Your words are important, for they reveal the psychology of the man. He would not have abandoned his bag unlocked at Paddington, with a note hidden within. It was placed thereafter. By whom? By the one who wished to direct suspicion far away, to India, to Madur. A convenient word, a plausible distraction, chosen because you, madam," he turned back to Mrs. Drake, "feared Selwood had uncovered irregularities in your husband's investments. He had written to Calcutta, yes, and to London, questioning the authority under which you drew dividends. The cables show it plainly. His silence, his death, served you very well." Mrs. Drake's face was composed, but her hand upon the armrest trembled ever so slightly. "This is outrageous. I was a widow seeking what was mine. If Selwood drowned, it was his own burden, not mine." Poirot bowed slightly. "Permit me to disagree. He did not drown himself. He was struck from behind, stunned, then weighted with your bathstone and tipped into the Avon. The contusion behind his ear proves it. You, madam, arranged it, because he threatened to expose the fraud of the Drake investments." Graves leaned forward, eyes hard. "Poirot, you're saying Mrs. Drake killed him herself?" Poirot shook his head gently. "Non, Inspector. Madam is elegant, but she is no assassin. She arranged, she commanded, but she did not deliver the blow. That fell to another hand, likely a servant, one she trusted, one who could carry a body and bind cords. The maid, perhaps, or a manservant once in her employ. She knows whom. But she is the mind. And it is the mind that is guilty." Mrs. Drake rose, tall and proud. "You have no proof. Wax and stone and gossip. You will not make a murderess of me with polish and laundry marks." Poirot's eyes glittered. "Ah, but I have one more thing. The word Madur. You claimed at first ignorance, then admitted it was a firm of your husband's trade. But in the archives I found a notice, 6 months ago, a new partner admitted to Madur Weaves and Trading. Initials, E.D. Who but you, Eleanor Drake? Selwood discovered it, questioned your authority, and you feared exposure. Thus you silenced him, dressing his death as despair, pointing as far away to India. But you see, the very eagerness of your signpost betrayed you." A silence heavier than stone filled the room. Miss Bennet's hand went to her mouth. Hargreaves muttered a curse under his breath. Graves snapped his notebook shut. Mrs. Drake swayed, then sank back into her chair, her eyes closing briefly. When she spoke, her voice was low. "You speak cleverly, Monsieur Poirot. Perhaps too cleverly. But even if anyone, were guilty, you cannot prove the act itself." Poirot's smile was sad but unyielding. "Proof, madam, comes not only from the hand that strikes but from the mind that plots. The bathstone fragments in your garden, the wax on your blinds, the cigarettes that scent your drawing room, these are not gossip. They are the chorus that sings your guilt. And when Inspector Graves confronts your servants, they will tell who carried the body that night." Graves rose. "Mrs. Drake, I must ask you to accompany me to the station." Her eyes flashed once with the pride of a woman cornered, then she straightened her shoulders. "Very well. But remember, gentlemen, men have hanged on less, and women too. Be sure you can bear the weight of it." She walked from the room with cold dignity, Graves at her side. When the door closed, silence lingered. Poirot adjusted a cushion, smoothed his moustache, and Saturday. Miss Bennet looked at him with wide, stricken eyes. "So it was her all along? Poor Mr. Salewood." Poirot bowed his head. "Justice will come, mademoiselle. The lies, the disorder, they betray themselves. It is always so." Hargreaves muttered, shaken. "I thought him ruined." And all the while, he left the sentence unfinished. Poirot sighed, gazing into the fire. There is a kind of vanity, messes it mesdames, in crime. It wishes to tell a story, tidy, complete. But life, you see, is never tidy. Only the murderer tidies. And that is how he, or she, is caught. He rose at last, taking his hat, his coat, his polished cane. At the door he paused, moustache gleaming in the lamplight. And so ends the case of Richard Salewood, whose order was broken by another's greed. Murder may disguise itself as despair, but always the little grey cells see through the theatre. Bonsoir. Poirot stepped into the wet night, leaving the house in silence, the mystery concluded, and justice beginning its quiet work.